All right. My name is H.A. Goodman. To support this YouTube channel, go to my Patreon link below in the description section. I have the great pleasure, and for me, it's an honor. I know they say, H.A., stop talking about it being an honor, but it's an honor for me, and it's a great pleasure to be with Elizabeth Beck and Jared Beck. And I just want to let everyone know who's watching that after this interview and discussion, go to Tim Black's channel, and there's a call-in, and Tim Black is he's a very powerful progressive voice, as you know, and he's going to have a great show at 9 p.m. Eastern. So definitely tune in to Tim Black. If you can't hear me or Elizabeth and Jared, let me know in the chat. But Jared and Elizabeth, thank you so much. Considering everything that went on today, thank you so much for this interview, and thank you for everything on behalf of so many people.
Oh, thanks for having us, H.A., and thank you for those very, very kind words.
What are your, I guess, the most open-ended question I could think of, what are your thoughts after today?
You want to handle that? Well, first of all, I think that it's very disappointing. Not so much because of the lawsuit itself, which only lasted a little over a year, but the whole history that precedes the lawsuit and what necessitated the filing of the lawsuit. So I think if you take a big view of things, it is very disappointing. I don't know if the problems will be solved. I've been giving it a lot of thought in the past year and a half, 2 years, and problems seem very, very, very profound and embedded into the very fabric of our country. And I think a lot of people recognize that we have problems. Everybody I talk to says that they see that we have problems. There is a desire for whatever we have now to change, and yet nothing happens. And why that is?
It's not only that nothing happens; it's that, you know, I don't think the American population has the awareness, frankly, at this point in time to, you know, insist on things being better. I mean, we who are on social media a lot, and we're steeped in independent news, like your fantastic show, H.A., and Tim Black and others who have been speaking, you know, the truth for so long. We may consider ourselves aware, but I fear that we live in a country where awareness is not something that people have with respect to what we're up against in terms of the deeply embedded corruption in our society and our political system. And, you know, in terms of where we go from here, I think that's probably a question that's on the mind of everybody who sees what's happening. But it's probably the biggest collective action problem that you can think of. And collective action requires collective consciousness. And you know, this population has been battered by propaganda and manipulation and corrupt politicians for so long, for decades and decades and decades. I mean, going back well into the last century at least. And I personally just have very, very little. And it's really apart from this lawsuit. I mean, I would be very naive to say to you right now that I expected that this lawsuit was going to materially solve problems in this country. You know, I don't consider myself a pie in the sky person. I like to be practical and effective, but I can tell you that this is just part of a larger story about what's going on in our legal system now, which is that if you go into court and you represent anybody else than a rich person or a powerful corporation, the chances of you having a fair day in court, I believe, are very, very slim to none. And that's just the reality of our legal system. And I don't think that people are fully cognizant of that. And it's part of the lack of awareness that's going on in our society. But as lawyers, we're very cognizant of it. We stopped representing corporations in 2007 because we were sick of picking on little people and kicking them out of their homes and stuff, which is what banks are very fond of.
You were working on cases like that.
Me too. Yes, I'm saying we were both working on cases.
You were making a very nice salary. He was making such a nice salary, basically doing bank side foreclosure work for a very, very short period when he was a baby lawyer, and then he just quit.
I wasn't a baby lawyer. I was in my third year.
Third year? And I consider that a baby.
Right, but more to the point, the work I was doing, I found morally objectionable. Okay, and I guess that I'm beginning to really see the contours of the society that we live in, and I don't know that there's room. I don't know that this society accommodates morality that's anything other than dog eat dog, vicious capitalism on the part of corporations and oligarchs.
Well, back when we were doing that work, you may think, oh, well, I don't really like this type of legal work. I think I would like this type of legal work better. But we didn't know just how much the system was corrupted and how unfair it was. And now you wouldn't necessarily know if you're always on the winning side. Does that make sense? You think, oh, we just must have great cases all the time, right? It's only when you're on the other side that you start to see things for what they are. And you're like, wait a minute, I really should not have lost that case. And then you think, okay, I know there's 5 lawyers on the other side. There's only 1 or 2 here. So maybe they just over-lawyered, but it happens a lot. And then there are cases where the law and the facts are squarely on your side, and nothing ever, nothing happens.
You get kicked out before trial.
You get kicked out before trial. So
this is routine. This is
nothing. Like,
this is actually, I wouldn't even, to say that I'm even surprised by this at any level would be lying to me.
So today I started tweeting HA and saying how people shouldn't pin too much hopes on the DNC lawsuit. I tweeted all of that out even before the order came down. Like, people thought, oh, that's why you were tweeting that. That's not why I was tweeting that. I just felt that people were pinning way too much hope on the lawsuit, and I wanted to have people not get their hopes up too high, and then boom, that order comes down. So, I wish I can say I was shocked, but I'm actually not shocked.
Well, the way that I see it is this. The way that I see it is this.
Oh, by the way, this is not wine.
Grape juice.
No, seriously, I'm really proud of myself because I quit smoking like 3 days ago, and I only smoked for like a couple of months. And I've been really good about it. And then now I cut wine with cranberry juice. So it's mostly cranberry.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the way that I see things is this. You have a wonderful couple in you guys battling a very corrupt machine. And then you have just utter morons who are quote-unquote journalists like Dave Weigel at the public relations firm.
Let me tell you something about that, because this what really disappoints me about our society, HA, is the fact that we had 2 witnesses die in this case, and I still have these fucking people who call themselves journalists mocking us, okay, denigrating us for being concerned about that. And it goes beyond a lack of awareness in this country. This country has a vicious, corrupt core, okay? And the most vicious, corrupt people are sitting in DC right now, running the show and forming the media elite and establishment that surrounds and protects them and promulgates their bullshit all over the airways. And I am sick and fucking tired of living in this country and having those be the people that run the show. Okay? All right? Because I've got 2 little kids. I know you have 2 little kids as well. And I can tell you, I didn't, what motivated me personally to file this lawsuit wasn't really what's going on in my life or what's going on in Elizabeth's life or the life of our clients, because, you know, we see our clients lose in court all the time. We see them get shafted by the healthcare system, get shafted by this country, and nobody in this country gives a fuck about them who's in the leadership, okay? And let me tell you something. I know that those problems are the problem of this country in terms of corruption. I know that it's so deep-seated. It's, you know, it's taken root over many, many decades, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. But my hope in filing this lawsuit was that at least might be some kind of spark to get things rolling, so that by the time my kids are adults in this society, they're not living in an immoral, oligarchic, tyrannical piece of shit government that fucking goes to war in my name with my tax dollars on a perpetual basis and fucking incinerates people, and I have no fucking channel to stop it. And as an American, I am ashamed. I am ashamed to call myself an American. And let me tell you something else, okay? There were people in Nazi Germany that didn't know what the fuck was going on either, okay? They were fucking clueless. They were fucking brainwashed. And I'm not making this comparison because of any bullshit comparison between Trump and Nazism that's going around that the mainstream media wants you to believe. What I'm talking about is the real government we have in this country, okay? And in my view, they are morally equivalent or worse than the government of the Nazi Germany. Okay, because they've been going on longer and they've been fucking over not just everybody in this country, but around the world. And I'm fucking sick of it as a human being.
And I agree 100% with you in terms of everything that the corruption that's going on in this country. And you know what you brought up, both of you have brought up so many important points. I think the DNC lawsuit, if anything, was a victory in terms of consciousness. We know now that we could fight back, that it is not normal. I think that millions of people around the country at least know that it is not normal to cheat a candidate in a primary when the Democratic Party is telling people that it's a fair and neutral primary. So at least we know now that it's not normal.
I don't think people care.
I don't think your average person cares.
I don't think they care.
I mean, I had a conversation with someone I know, very highly educated, has a PhD, and they're, you know, the first thing out of their mouth when the conversation turned to politics was, well, you know, I think that Russia stuff is kind of serious. Okay. All right. I mean, this is the level of brainwashing that has been just overwhelmed these people. Folks in this country. I mean, I have a lot of compassion for people that are in that situation because I see the process and what's happened to them, and I don't attribute any conscious,
You're scaring the dog.
Okay. The dog's always.
He's scaring the dog.
Anyway,
the dog is now woke.
Our dog's always scared because she doesn't like it when it rains outside.
Yeah, but Ruby, Ruby vomited during the primaries, and I was like, wow, you know.
Even the dog's getting.
As did I. I have something in common with the dog. You know, I think that I wanted to. I know I don't have to because I'm preaching to the choir here, but I wanted to just get your take on something. There are the ridiculous, quote unquote, I call them the pseudo pragmatists because they're not pragmatic at all. They continue to lose, even with overwhelming media collusion. And I consider the Washington Post and New York Times, CNN, and all of them public relations firms of the Democratic Party. And yet they still lost. And yet they're still pontificating about pragmatism. And you have a guy like Dave Weigel at the Washington Post, probably one of the biggest public relations firms on the planet. And they still lost, even though they put their full weight behind Clinton.
Right.
What do you think about the power or lack thereof of the media in this country to, at least nowadays, to pull the wool over people's eyes or to lie and deceive? Because with Clinton, it didn't work. But they're very successful in terms of wars, like you're saying, and this Russian nonsense, which has already been debunked by disobedient media and Elizabeth Voss and Adam Carter and the Forensicator and Bill Binney and a whole lot of other people. But what do you think of the media's attempt to continually lie to people and and the people fighting back?
Well, I think, you know, it's a important point, but I mean, it actually makes me frightened, at least as far as the stability of this country goes, because it's not just, yes, I mean, the media has lost a good deal of the power that it had and it exercised for decades in this country. I mean, I think that's one of the lessons that we can take away from Trump winning in the general election, when he clearly was the disfavored candidate. I'm sorry, my kids are kind of babbling, but he was clearly the disfavored candidate as far as the media was concerned. On the other hand, in order to get us to a better place, I mean, I really think you have to appreciate the size of the problem here. The population requires a deprogramming. It's you know, you can't, it's not just a matter of taking the media power away. I mean, just think of it this way. If you've got like a cult of people and you've brainwashed them under sort of a charismatic cult leader, like a Koresh type, okay? And then suddenly, you know, you take away David Koresh and you let those people out into the real world, you're going to get a lot of confused and possibly very angry, violent people out there, unless you know, at the same time, make sure that, you know, they've been deprogrammed out of whatever ideas were brainwashed into their heads, because that's the world.
But don't you think that everything that you've done has been, because I actually happen to think that the DNC lawsuit, even though, you know, the judge dismissed it, I happen to think the DNC lawsuit and everything that both of you have done has been part of, in a way, deprogramming people.
Well, I think it's awakened certain people, and
like,
I think
like how many?
Yeah, but the issue is, yeah, we're talking about scale. I mean, you know, again, I mean, there were some very woke people back in 2000. I mean, what percentage of the country voted for Nader? I mean, enough for the Democrats to blame, you know, Bush getting elected on what, the 4 to 5% that voted for Nader, which was a lot more than Jill Stein got, and it was a lot more than the other guy, Gary Johnson, got. You know, before that, you know, people forget Ross Perot ran a very independent campaign. I mean, I wouldn't call it a progressive campaign, but it was sort of, it was definitely outside the political establishment, and he picked up a huge number when he ran against Clinton and Bush. But, you know, that, and those are large scale, I would say, things. I just, you know, the scale of this is, you know, it's gone completely unreported in the mainstream media. It will go.
Why do you think that even quote unquote independent channels on YouTube, quote unquote independent, why do you think that there's CNN and then there's CNN on YouTube? Why? It's like, why did people who claim to be progressive or love Bernie not give you 100% support the way Tim Black did, the way I did, the way others did?
Well, because they're either they are wedded to interests that have a stake in continuing the two-party duopoly uninterrupted, or, you know, they've been led to believe the spin that those people are putting on things, and you know, our lawsuit doesn't fit anywhere into that picture of the future for them. So I think it's really simple.
Why did, in terms of just the technical legal justification that the judge gave, I know that the judge actually, part of it was he admitted that the DNC did cheat. And yet, even though the judge knew the DNC cheated, he still went ahead with his decision. Why do you think that took place?
Well, so that's probably best answered with knowing a little bit about the standard on a motion to dismiss. In a motion to dismiss, which is the motion that the DNC filed in this case, when you decide a motion like that, the court is required to assume that all the allegations in the complaint are true for the sake of deciding the motion. And so that's why there's language in the order where the judge accepts the allegations as true because he's bound by that particular standard in deciding the motion. So then the question is, what was the basis for his decision? And, it's a 28-page order, but I think the crux of it comes down to the paragraph where he says that donating to the DNC or to Bernie Sanders' campaign does not entitle plaintiffs to challenge the manner in which the DNC has conducted its affairs. Okay, so he's basically bought into and agreed with the line of reasoning that was set forth by the DNC in its motion, which says that the plaintiffs in this case have no standing to pursue their claims, notwithstanding the fact that they donated collectively $228 million to Bernie Sanders while believing that the election would be conducted in an impartial and even-handed manner as required under the DNC's own charter.
In terms of the DNC, in terms of the DNC getting away with this, do you think that I asked you, Jared, before, and I think it's important for anyone who's has a progressive value system to understand this. We're talking also about 2018 and especially 2020 with this hysteria regarding Trump and the media frenzy. Mm-hmm. What are the chances? And I asked this in my last interview with you, Jared, and now I have you and Elizabeth. I'd like to get both your take on just the percentages. What are the chances that the DNC cheats its most progressive candidate in 2020?
I don't know if we can. If we can, I don't know.
100%. It's 100%. It's and honestly, I mean, I'm not planning to participate in the political process going forward. Personally, I think it's a big fraud. I don't know why anyone would donate money to candidates. I think you're throwing your money into the trash.
I don't think they want the money anyway.
Yeah, they don't need your individual money. They get enough money from corporations, and to the extent that candidates like Bernie Sanders exist, they're there to suck some money out of the peasants. Okay, that's what their purpose is. So, look, I know that's a hard thing for progressives to take. I know a lot of people believe that Bernie Sanders was an authentic, avenue to a progressive future for this country that doesn't look like the nightmare oligarchic capitalist system that's dominated this country for many, many decades. But he wasn't that. I mean, he was an illusion that was up there, and he served the purpose of sucking a lot of money out of people. And now we have another a piece of jurisprudence, which we can put with other cases that I'd be happy to discuss anytime with UHA that have come down from our courts, which say that, or allow frauds to happen on a grand scale and give no recourse to the people who get defrauded. So, just by one example, large banks can take money right out of your account. They can steal money right from your bank account, and you would have no way of joining a class action against them as the law currently stands, because they all have arbitration clauses in their agreements with you. And so if you try to sue a bank for literally stealing money out of your account, you will be sent to an arbitration process, which is run by a private arbitrator who the bank uses over and over again in its cases. That's the American way. Okay, and I think it's time for people that maybe have been spending a lot of mental energy dreaming progressive dreams and being inspired by progressive candidates, and perhaps opening their wallets or spending any kind of energy or volunteer effort for progressive causes. I think it's maybe time to be a little more realistic about how this country really works, and to focus on the real problems, which is not that we don't have progressive candidates or progressive ideals or plenty of people in this country that actually think maturely about problems in the world. It's not that we don't have that in this country, but we have a system that makes it 100% impossible for any of those people to ever get into a position of leadership in this country. And even if, you know, a person may even start out a career in politics in this country having perfectly wonderful deals, but if they're going to rise in our system, you can bet by the time they're in a position of influence, those ideals do not factor into their decision making. That's the country we have. That's the country we live in. And until the system itself is overhauled in a very major way, that's the system we can expect until, you know, perhaps the whole thing comes crashing down. Who knows what the future holds.
Why didn't Bernie Sanders support you and Elizabeth? Why didn't he lend his political support to this DNC lawsuit? And being an independent, why didn't he, you know, be truly independent when in this matter, since we know from not only everything that you've done to expose the DNC corruption, we know from WikiLeaks DNC emails, and we know from Debbie Wasserman Schultz stepping down and the other DNC officials stepping down. And we also know from CNN firing Donna Brazil based on the WikiLeaks DNC emails that it was Bernie Sanders who was cheated. Why didn't Bernie help you guys or support you?
As Jared just said, in order to rise, you have to throw away your ideals. And as you can see, Bernie is still in the Senate, and he hasn't been kicked out. And he's still part of the U.S. Senate, which is what, 100 people? It's a very select group of people, and he's there. So the powers that be have deemed him fit to stay. It's not you or me.
Right.
Okay? He didn't have a heart attack.
True threats to this. You know what happens to true threats to this system, HA?
What happens?
They end up in coffins.
Yeah, like King. Okay.
Martin Luther King.
Okay,
Robert Kennedy, JFK.
This is what they do.
That's what I mean. That's what happens.
They kill you, and then they name a street after you, and then they
or in the case of JFK, you might get a school or an airport or something.
Airport. They name shit after you after you're dead. That's what they do to people who are a true threat. Okay, and then they give your like surviving family like plaques and awards. That's what they do in this country. So we're never going to get any real leaders. Never.
Why even have, so it's definitely not an understatement. And I know this is, you know, a softball question, but if you could just elaborate, what kind of charade, what kind of theater, what kind of farce is the Democratic primary in 2020?
I'm not even talking about the Democratic primary. We're talking about the government, the entire structure.
Right. No, but
the entire structure is bad.
Right. But the primary itself, I mean, you know, I guess it depends whether, you know, Bernie's going to make another run or something. I mean, you know, that'll affect the characters somewhat. But if he doesn't make another run, you'll probably have somebody who will throw their hat in the ring to get some name recognition as the progressive candidate. Knowing full well that they have no chance. And then you'll have somebody like Kamala Harris or maybe someone else who will be the candidate that's been pre-selected. And, you know, they might try to do things a little differently because, you know, the shitting all over the Bernie Sanders supporters really didn't work out too well as far as the general was concerned last time. So they might even try to find like a fake progressive candidate to run up there to sort of, you know, pretend to be the redo of Bernie so that they can slip him in as a vice president or something. Whatever they do, though, is going to be very easy to figure out because they don't really hide shit anymore. Okay, it's like it's out in the open now. So, and you know, I don't think they can hide shit if they want to because we have the internet. So, you know, it'll be probably a disaster. You know, the establishment candidate is, you know, probably going to get massacred because I think there's a lot of support for Trump. I
agree with you. I think that any establishment Democrat loses. And I think that to Elizabeth's point and to your point, I agree 100% with you in terms of structural. Any threat is addressed by the establishment if they feel threatened regarding structural change. When do you think, or what do you think has to happen for us to stop continually engaging as a nation in either regime change, and we have soldiers everywhere on the planet. We even have soldiers in Yemen and Syria now, in addition to Trump, repeating Obama and Bush's mistake. Right. When will the United States learn in terms of structural change? You know, we're heading towards another potential financial collapse because the banks that were bailed out are just actually bigger than they were when they failed. Right. What needs to take place in our society for not just the term awakened or woke? What needs to take place for structural change in Wall Street, war, foreign policy, those big grandiose issues?
I think there has to be a critical mass of people that are willing to act against their own self-interest for the common good.
Right.
And that is such a strange concept to most people.
Right.
That because we live in a society where everybody wants to pay as little tax as possible if it doesn't help your life. So, you know, I don't want to pay taxes because I don't have kids in school. I don't want to pay high property taxes because my kids go to private school. Why the hell do I need to do that? Roads, why do I need, what do you mean clean water in another state? I don't even live there. I can afford bottled water. So that attitude in all of us creates for a very intolerable system for all of us, okay? Because it creates a very insecure social fabric. Like, people don't really talk to each other. They don't really care about each other.
I mean, we were just, you know, in Costco or...
I was at Costco. So I'm pushing my cart and shopping at Costco. And I got freaked out because all these people, including myself, were pushing our carts and kind of moving around each other like a video game, but nobody's interacting with each other.
Right.
Like, the only people at Costco that people interact with are those like ladies in kiosks that give you free samples. That's the only human interaction. You don't go up to a random person in Costco and say, "Oh, hey, Jim, how you doing?"
Right.
You know, how's your mom? You need any help? How's she doing? Is she back from the hospital? That kind of, it's disappearing.
I mean, it's actually really simple in terms of forcing structural change on governments. I mean, I'll just give you a good example of it. South Korea is prosecuting the president, the former president, for pay-to-play corruption, just like Hillary Clinton.
President Kim.
Yeah, and you know, the reason they're doing it is because millions of Koreans got into the streets as the corruption was being revealed to the public, and they demanded it from the government.
Mind you, Korea is like the size of Utah. So that's an enormous percentage of the nation's population. But it doesn't matter in our country because even before the analysis of whether or not this is right or wrong happens, the initial analysis is, which side am I on?
Yeah.
That's the first analysis, okay? And people are not willing to call out bad behavior on your own side.
Right.
Now, your own side can mean anything from your misbehaving children to your party, to your employer, to your profession.
To your party.
To your political party.
Right.
Hi.
You know, it's nobody wants to clean up their own house.
What do you think? Like, I agree with you 100% on that point. In terms of MSNBC, CNN, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and all the subsidiary umbrella public relations firms, was it BuzzFeed or Daily Beast, Gizmodo, all of them, I think that this is what I think might happen, is probably going to happen. You're not going to see Rachel Maddow anymore after 2020, because I do think that the Democrats will lose again in 2020. And I think that I was hoping there would be a complete sea change in 2016. Of course, there wasn't. They doubled down on every failed tactic. But I think if Trump wins again, and I think he will win again, the Democratic Party, at least part of it, will be forced to reshuffle or transform or reflect in a more positive manner. Do you think I'm just being too optimistic or naive? Because I think, though, that a 2020 loss, they'll have to change.
No, you're thinking too. Here's the problem.
That's too partisan.
Well, here's my response to that. And I would, before I went to law school, I studied political philosophy. So I'm going to make a political philosophy reference here to book 8 of Plato's Republic. Okay, and actually Plato was a pretty smart guy, and he knew a lot about politics. And one of the reasons that he actually knew a lot about politics is because historically at the time, the area of Greece where he was from was divided into many different city-states like Athens and Sparta and so forth. And so there were a lot of different political regimes that he actually observed, and he observed whole cycles of political change. And he came up with, some observations that I think are particularly relevant to today.
He predicted all this, didn't he?
Well, in a very large way. I mean, he talks about oligarchy and why oligarchies exist and what motivates them and where they come from. And this is all in book 8 for people who are interested. But essentially, oligarchies come about because they're characterized by rule by the wealthy. And the problem with oligarchies, according to Plato, is that the wealthy are not the best equipped to rule. They don't have the necessary characteristics that make for ruling a society in a wise manner. That's Plato's central observation. And we can see that in our own country. I mean, oligarchs or wealthy people are motivated primarily by accumulating wealth and preserving wealth for themselves. And they could give a fuck about what everybody else in the country has. And that's just bad government. And that's what we're in. The problem is that oligarchies in Plato's model are stable for a while, and actually our oligarchy has been fairly stable. I would say that we've been pretty much ruled by oligarchs, or a small group of wealthy people, probably continuously since at least the middle of
1776.
I don't think so. I think we had a different. I think Plato would say that we had a different type of government,
a democracy.
A timocracy, which is actually not a democracy with a D, but it's basically ruled by property owners, which is kind of a different concept. Of course, if you didn't own property, or you were literally property, a slave, you were shit out of luck, and the system we had was terrible. But in Plato's model, the timocracy devolves into an oligarchy. So I think that we've had this probably since last century. The problem is what comes after oligarchy is really, really bad. And what happens is that eventually, what happens is that you get a very disordered state in society. And a lot of that happens because the rich start to get into conflict with each other as people become wise to the oligarchy and they start to challenge it. And so that's, I think, what's the next stage is going to be. And I think that the this is all a very long way of answering your question, H.A., and I apologize for being kind of long-winded, but I think in answer to your question, I think we're headed for more conflict, and I feel that the Democratic Party is, the idea that they're going to somehow listen to reason and realize that they have to, play ball with the progressives, that assumes that they're thinking other than in terms of how do I preserve my power in this society, because that's what the Democratic Party represents first and foremost. It's a channel by which oligarchs exercise power. So in your hypothetical, we have them willingly giving up power because they see themselves as fucked, but that's not how oligarchs roll.
So what has to happen for the Democratic Party to lose its power in terms of its ability to promote corruption? What needs to take place?
Well, Plato says that if society does not, if we collectively do not get our act together, and that's when I say we, I'm not talking about Democrats, okay? I see a little bit of signs, but I don't think there's enough. If we don't right the ship, the next step is basically chaos and anarchy. Think the wild, wild west. And by the way, you see this in other countries where there's no, where there's a loss of law and order. People take matters into their own hands, and they just set people on fire. They do all sorts of crazy stuff. So that's the next step. And then the step after that is people get sick of the chaos, and then we go into tyranny, which is one person comes. We're not. People think the Trump administration is a tyranny. No, that's not tyranny. Okay, so we haven't even reached the point of complete anarchy. So then after that, it's tyranny. And that's when people get so sick of the mess and the confusion and the lack of law and order that they'll elect somebody and give that person just absolute power. They don't fight back. Okay, that person becomes a tyrant. Okay, and that's when people start basically openly disappearing off the streets. It's not even, they're not even like, it's not even a suicide. They just, you know, disappear. And my mother lived through that, so it does happen.
At what point in terms of the worst case scenario, at what point do people stop believing the propaganda machine, public relations firms like the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN? At what point do people say, you know what, they've lied and they've spun everything to hurt so many people? At what point before that worst case scenario that you were describing do you think that
one of two things has to happen? One is you just have to be informed, and even if nothing bad directly happened to you, you have to say, this is wrong. I'm going to speak out against it. But that's kind of sort of an optimistic view of human nature. What is more likely is that more and more people get directly shafted. Okay? And then they start to put their foot down, and they say, oh, wait a minute. What do you mean my son's going to prison for 30 years? Mm-hmm. Wait a minute. He didn't do anything wrong, you know? But
HA, so your question is, you know, at what point do people stop believing the propaganda?
Yeah.
I mean, something has to happen.
But I mean, the issue though is that, I mean,
because a lot of it is self-serving. I understand. Like the way I look at it is the whole Russian nonsense garbage is this giant therapy session where people want to believe nonsense, and they don't want to go ahead. It's too difficult to look into the mirror and say, yeah, we actually elevated the person that we don't want to be in power, and we did everything possible to ensure this corrupt system stays in place forever. But I'm just thinking that, you know, I agree with everything that you've stated. I think that, you know, we are headed, if people don't change, we are headed to a very dire scenario potentially. But I'm hoping, and I think that there's, maybe it's just me being optimistic, but I think that there's a groundswell of people, or at least a growing number of people, who aren't believing the nonsense. Because you know, you look at the whole Russia, then it turned to Charlottesville, because almost certainly the powers that be within the Democratic Party realized that Russia just wasn't enough. Yeah, and then it might turn to something else. But I don't know if smoke and mirrors propaganda, I mean, I don't know how long it works.
We're a victim of it as we speak, HA. I mean, here's the thing about propaganda. You know, this isn't the same society as you know, the Soviet Union or North Korea, where sort of propaganda has the overriding purpose of telling people what to believe, because we do have the First Amendment here, and there's a tradition of free speech. So, you know, I think the oligarchs have accepted the fact that you can't silence people in the same way and tell them what to believe in the same way that you might in a Soviet Union or North Korea scenario. So propaganda has every much in this society to do with that as it does with disinformation and distraction. Okay, and we're every time we sit there, we sit on our, you know, whether it's social media or, you know, with our friends and colleagues, and we talk about, you know, what the hell was that shit in Charlottesville, and there's Russia narratives all BS, and we talk about that. What we're actually doing is not talking about what we should be talking about, which is the fact that we have Pakistani spy network infiltrated Congress through the former chair of the DNC, and we've got an indictment against the lowest level guy, but Debbie Wasserman Schultz is still running around doing town halls like, you know, nothing's happened. And, you know, why aren't people so outraged that, I mean, the fact that she hasn't resigned in shame is so alarming to me.
I agree.
As a person who, believes that a modicum of morality and shame she would have. I mean, it used to be that when, you know, a scandal like that happened, the first thing that would happen is that the politician would step down. Okay, but we don't have that anymore in this country, and I think a large part of it is because the media has now put the distraction campaign into overdrive. So, as we sit here and we talk about dissecting the Russia, and the Hillary supporters are so brainwashed with this nonsense that they believe, what we're actually doing is we're spending our energy talking about issues that are not the real issue, which is the fact that criminals run our government and they continue to go unprosecuted. I mean, it's that simple.
Do you think in terms of the Alwan scandal that, because I think that it leads directly to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Do you think that, especially with Imran Awan and the Alwans storing intelligence on off-site servers, do you think that Debbie Wasserman Schultz will eventually experience the repercussions politically and legally? Do you think it's possible that she does?
Maybe not. But if she's the scapegoat for the deep-seated corruption in our government, I think that the powers that be will be perfectly happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, if they want to throw her under the bus, people think, oh, as long as Imran Awan and this, Congresswoman Schultz is behind bars, we're going to go back to Nirvana or something.
They might throw us, some breads and circuses and give us, the satisfaction of a trial of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I could see that happening, but I would be, shocked if it went any further than that. And I think that's a stretch.
Who's that hedge fund guy who they're having a trial on him? Pharma Bro.
No, yeah, Scarelli.
Scarelli. Yeah. Okay, putting Debbie Wasserman Schultz behind bars is like putting Scarelli behind bars, and yet everything else about our hospital and pharmaceutical goes on the same. It's like the same.
Yeah. I mean,
I see what you're saying, and I agree with you. And I guess the last question, you've been so wonderful, both of you, is that a broad question: where do we go from here? You did the right thing, and you're a hero. Both of you are heroes for everything that you've done. And I know that you say, or Elizabeth said, well, there's not many people who realize this, but I actually think there's a great many people throughout the country who view you as heroes, and I certainly do, and I know Tim Black does.
Well, that's really disturbing, because that's not a good look for this country. Okay, I'm serious.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't even know what that's like. I guess that's like, what's like a middling car?
I don't know.
It's like looking at like, oh, I don't know, like a what's like a Chevrolet, or what's like sort of an average car that, okay, you know what
Honda?
It is? No, it's like my Dodge Caravan, which is okay, but it's not that great. It's like looking at the Dodge Caravan and be like, that is the best piece of automotive technology I've ever seen. Right.
I mean, we're basically a couple of plaintiffs' lawyers sitting here. you know, I can tell you that, you know, the practice of plaintiff's law really sucks to begin with now. I mean, the system that we have is, I mean, I'll just quote Judge Richard Posner, probably the most respected judge in this country, and he says that we have a very, very crappy judicial system. Okay, so for you know, a judge like Posner to say that, as a lawyer practicing the system, I get very, very little satisfaction out of my practice these days. Part of the reason we filed this lawsuit is because the system we have is, in terms of our political system, you know, just continues to make life miserable for the people that we represent as clients. Representing them in the legal system really sucks. In terms of where do we go from here, HA? I mean, I think everybody needs to, you know, do a moral gut check and think about their complicity in the crimes that this country has continued to perpetrate and will perpetrate. I mean, at a certain point, you know, you become complicit if you allow it to go on and you don't do what you can to stop it. There were plenty of, you know, people in Nazi Germany that let a very, very evil regime do very horrible things, and they, you know, they may have been personally outraged about it, but they didn't do anything to step up and put a stop to it. And, you know, again, I don't use that analogy because I buy into any of the bullshit that, you know, Trump is anything like a Nazi. I just use it as an example of another time in Western civilization not that long ago when a country was allowed to get away with a lot of very, very evil things, and the population of the country was very complicit. And, you know, I'm sad to say, as an American, that every day this goes on in terms of what we have for a government, I feel complicit in it. You know, the longer that I participate in the system.
I guess one last question is: did the judge's decision leave room open for any further lawsuits against the DNC?
Well, you know, we haven't had a chance to confer with our co-counsel on what the next steps are. So, you know, and we haven't even had a chance to discuss the order yet, but we'll be doing that within the next couple of days, and then we'll be issuing our opinions on, you know, what, if any, are the next steps from here.
Well, listen, I want to just first say thank you so much for, especially on this day, to still have this interview with both of you. It means a great deal to me. I know it means a great deal to a lot of people watching. And I will say, even though there's some pushback, but you guys are heroes. I firmly believe that. I just want to thank you for everything that you've done.
That's the problem. That's the problem.
I know, but you know,
he's trying to be nice, though.
I know, but
you know, Elizabeth.
No, I do. I really appreciate you saying that. I also want to just take this opportunity to not only thank you, but everybody that's been sending us support and encouragement. And, you know, even, you know, just, I mean, it really means a lot every time we get these comments, because, you know, otherwise, you know, this would be a completely thankless job. I mean, we live in a day and age now where, like, you know, members of the media basically, you know, harass, like, you know, we're like a 2-lawyer law firm. Okay. I mean, you know, the Washington Post basically goes out of its way now to, like, harass and troll me.
I mean, they're a public. Well, that's the thing. They're a public relations firm, and I view them as the most corrupt, underhanded. Same with you know, MSNBC, all of them, and that's, you know, and that's going back to my compliment, which is a fact. It's reality. I think what you guys did was wonderful and heroic, and I think that at the end of the day, whereas we might not see, you know, in front of us how many people were positively impacted by all of this, I do think there's a great many people who are now more aware and more conscious of what's going on because of the work that you and Elizabeth have done. So I just want to thank you again. And I would love to have you both back on at whenever you'd like on this channel.
No, thank you for giving a voice to our lawsuit. You know, I think this was maybe the only voice that a lot of people felt they had in the wake of what happened in the primaries. You know, I think, you know, it's up to people who have the means to do so to continue to try to give all of our fellow Americans a voice, at least to express our dissatisfaction with our government, even if, you know, the road to making change is a long and arduous one.
You know, I have so little faith in the court system that I almost feel like I'm a dog put out of my misery. You know?
Yeah.
That sounds terrible, doesn't it?
I mean, a lot of times
when that order came down, I felt like a horse put out of its misery.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, you know, courts,
well, better sooner rather than later.
You know, a lot of times these days, I mean, we've had cases where, you know, we've put in, you know, tons and tons.
They kind of fuck with you.
Yeah, tons and tons of hours and personal resources. Let me just say, you know, you put hours and resources into a case, and you take multiple depositions, you know, as a plaintiff's lawyer, and then on the eve of trial, the court just dismisses your case based on, you know, an order that doesn't even make any sense. I mean, that happened to us in a case just yesterday, in fact. I mean, it's been, you know, we're just getting, you know, we basically, you know, when you try to do this work, you're basically asking to be kicked around by the judicial system. And that's exactly what the judicial system does. They don't want lawyers like us practicing. They want lawyers that are cool with the way things are. And, you know, just like, I mean, just remember, you know, courts come from the political system. They're, you know, in the federal system, they're appointed by the same corrupt politicians that, you know, are you know, creating misery for all of us. And in the state courts, they're often elected. Okay.
Do you think the judge might have been influenced politically?
Oh, I have no idea.
No idea.
I have no idea.
No idea. I mean, you know, you know, I'm not, I mean,
they're not going to tell us, you know?
Right. I mean, you know, at the end of the day.
But I think it's kind of, I think writing our country on, pinning that on like one judge or one lawsuit or one lawyer is just,
it's unrealistic.
It's unrealistic.
Yeah. I mean,
I've reached a point where if a judge throws out the case like sooner rather than years later, I'm like, well, you know,
at least I didn't.
He kind of did us a favor.
Yeah, at least we didn't spend a lot of money on a wasted effort. So, you know, in a way, you know, there's a positive here, which is like, you know, let's, you know,
no torture.
Let's get to the result as quick as possible.
Get it out of its misery.
You know, this case is. That's what I would tell. That's what I tell my clients. If my clients were, you know, saying, so what do I do now with this order? Well, let me finish this. I mean, so, you know, I'll say what I would say to my client. You know, gee, you know, that order really sucked. What do we do? You know, I'd say, look on the bright side. You know, you didn't go through, you know, 10 years of litigation and through, you know, a messy trial and have your hopes up only to have it dashed on the eve of trial, or, you know, have, you know, a jury trial that was rigged. And, you know, rigged juries happen in this country more often than people want to admit. You know, so, you know, at least, you know, you got a result and you got it in a relatively quick fashion, which is, you know, a lot more than I can say for a lot of my other cases. I mean, I've had cases where I've had motions pending for 2.5 years without getting decided.
Wow.
I had a case where I filed a motion and I couldn't get a hearing on the motion for an entire 1.5 years. Okay. Wow. I mean, we have a legal system that is, I mean, I'll quote Judge Posner again, very crappy. Okay. And when I say when he says very crappy, you know, he means very crappy. And this is a guy who is sitting on the 7th Circuit in Chicago, one of the greatest jurists that America has known in recent history. That's his assessment. If that doesn't scare the shit out of people, you know, I don't know what else would.
Well, listen, I just want to thank both of you so much. I could spend all night, but you have better things to do than be here. And I just want to thank you again. And you are welcome literally any day, anytime. You let me know, and look forward to speaking with you both again very soon. And you have a great, wonderful evening. Have a great weekend, and just know that a lot of people care about you. And thank you so much for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, HA. It's good talking.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Okay. Take it easy.